Hello, it's Mr. Unruh-Friesen, and I'd like to spend a little time with you today reviewing incorporation theory, also known as incorporation doctrine. And it's something that the AP people keep going back to and back to and back to again on the AP exam. They love asking questions about this. It's a little confusing, and they think it's a great separator. Who deserves a 5? Who deserves a 1? So let's make sure you guys know. We need to review briefly the Barron v. Baltimore case. And if you remember, Barron's this guy who owned a wharf, a dock, and he was very profitable because big ships could come in and dock at Baltimore Harbor, and he was very, very wealthy. But then there was a problem. Baltimore did some street repairs and it silted in his wharf. And so no longer could the boats come and dock at Barron's wharf, and he's no longer rich. In fact, he's going to be ruined. So he's going to sue in state civil court. He loses in state court, and then he eventually, Barron sues in federal court, and this case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And here's his argument. The Fifth Amendment's takings clause says, "Nor shall any private property be taken for public use without just compensation." Baltimore's street repairs took his wharf, and therefore Baltimore should compensate him. This is what he's arguing to the United States Supreme Court. Barron is disappointed. He loses. But more importantly, this case set a very important precedent that the Bill of Rights does not apply to the states. The federal government has to abide by the Bill of Rights, but not the states. The first 10 amendments contain no expression indicating an intention to apply them to state governments. This court cannot so apply them, is what the Supreme Court said in their ruling. So let's look at it this way. If you look at the left side of your screen, let's say the light, and it's a spectrum of light coming from the Constitution, the liberties in the Bill of Rights, shine across people living in the United States as a whole from their federal government, and also across states from their state government. But what Barron v. Baltimore did is it kind of erected a wall that stopped the light of the Bill of Rights from washing over people in Minnesota or in any of the states. And so the Bill of Rights protects you only from the feds, not from the state governments. So this begs the question, the only way that you would be protected, for example, let's go back to Barron, and remember he had a Fifth Amendment issue that the government took his property without compensating him for it. Now, if Maryland, where Baltimore is, didn't protect that right, Barron had no recourse. And he couldn't use the national Constitution's Fifth Amendment because of this new wall that had been constructed, Barron v. Baltimore. Now, the way this is going to become undone and the way this is going to change is because of perhaps the most powerful amendment in the United States Constitution, the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause specifically, which reads, "Nor shall any state," notice the emphasis there on the word state, "no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." And we're going to keep going back to this due process clause. So the one in red, very important. The one in blue, the Equal Protection Clause, is going to be important for a lot of civil rights cases and, for example, cases about same-sex marriage that are going through the Supreme Court right now are dealing with the blue clause, but we're going to focus on the red clause today. "Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." So what selective incorporation theory means is that on a case-by-case, little-by-little basis, the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, has nationalized the Bill of Rights, meaning that people in the Minnesota state government has to abide by the protections in the Bill of Rights, and the light from the Bill of Rights will wash over all of the states. So, in other words, the states have to follow the Bill of Rights, which they didn't originally have to do because of the case Barron v. Baltimore, which erected that wall. So, one of the cases that textbooks love to talk about with this is the Gideon v. Wainwright case. And Gideon, you'll remember, was this drifter down in Florida. He got arrested, and he wasn't allowed to have an attorney. It was a felony crime. He said that he had a right to an attorney because the Sixth Amendment says so. But this is a state case, and at the time, the Florida state judge told Gideon that the Sixth Amendment didn't apply to him. The light of the Sixth Amendment didn't wash across him because of the Barron v. Baltimore wall. Now, if he had committed a federal felony, sure, you get an attorney, but not in a state case. Well, Gideon didn't like that, and so he wrote a letter to the Supreme Court asking them to take his case. And on the screen here is actually the Department of Corrections correspondence paper that he wrote this letter on. And here's Gideon's argument. What if I take the Due Process Clause, which remember says no state can deprive a person of life, liberty, or property? So what was Gideon deprived of? He was deprived of his liberty. He was in prison. And the Sixth Amendment says he should have gotten an attorney. So he wanted to combine these things. It's a pretty clever argument. So he actually asked the Supreme Court for a writ of cert, a writ of certiorari. And if you remember, this is the most common way cases make it to the Supreme Court. And a writ of cert is when the Supreme Court takes a case from even way down in Florida State Court and sucks it all the way up to the Supreme Court, quote, to be made more certain. So in class we use this SpongeBob analogy. So SpongeBob here loves the 14th Amendment. But let's look a little closer at SpongeBob. And I asked you in class, do you see it? Do you see it? We keep looking closer and closer at SpongeBob. Oh, I'm starting to see something on SpongeBob here at 8 times magnification. Let's look at 16 times magnification, and we see that SpongeBob's pores are inundated with due process. Remember, due process says no state shall deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And what those due process pores do, pores in a sponge suck in water, right? And so what happens is the Sixth Amendment is sucked into those pores, and now SpongeBob is a combination of the 14th Amendment due process and the Sixth Amendment. So if we use this setup, notice there's a pail here at the bottom of the screen that has Sixth Amendment water in it. And here we have a sponge, and remember the sponge is filled with due process pores. The water of the Sixth Amendment soaks into the sponge. And now we have the Sixth Amendment plus the due process 14th Amendment. And in the ruling of Gideon v. Wainwright, all people in the United States, whether charged in federal or state, remember the state comes in because of the due process clause, have the right to an attorney for felony charges. Now I have the United States here with many different colors, meaning there was many different rules. Some states did give state felony people an attorney automatically. Some states, like Florida, said not. But after Gideon v. Wainwright, what happens is, picture that sponge with 14th Amendment and the Sixth Amendment all in this sponge together, and you wring that sponge out over the United States, and it soaks the entire United States, all of the states, with now the same rule. And now the light from the Sixth Amendment shines through, and shines through that Barron v. Baltimore wall, and now all states have to follow it. This decision wasn't very popular with a lot of states, because if states didn't give felony state cases an attorney, now they had to. And it gave Gideon the right to have a retrial. This time he had an attorney, and his attorney was able to get him off the hook for the crime. Now remember, incorporation theory is sometimes called selective incorporation theory. And the entire Sixth Amendment was not incorporated all at the same time. And here you see a list of cases, all of these having to do with the Sixth Amendment. This is that little by little, piece by piece, the Sixth Amendment was incorporated or nationalized, meaning that the states also had to abide by the Bill of Rights. So let's go back to our wall analogy. And what happens with selective incorporation is let's place a focusing lens, the due process clause, across the light. And what this lens does is it amplifies the light. It bends the light and it kind of turns it into a laser, let's say. So what happens is the Sixth Amendment can blast through that Barron v. Baltimore wall, shine through, and now notice the guy in the state is saying, I can use the Sixth Amendment to protect myself against the state of Minnesota. And what has happened over time is more and more cases have happened. So here's a little bit of the First Amendment, selective incorporation. Not all at once, little by little. And notice now red's starting to shine over the state of Minnesota. Oh, and there's another First Amendment case that affects Minnesota. The Second Amendment. Through selective incorporation, on a case-by-case basis, over time, I am protected by nearly the entire Bill of Rights against actions of my state government. Incorporation theory.